I've been using the Sony Burano since day one, and I want to break down what it's like to use in the real world with this new update and what actually still needs fixing. Because while some of these new features are seriously impressive, there are some major flaws that Sony didn't somehow address. It's no secret that the Sony Burano did not have the smoothest launch. Even though it boasts some really impressive features like the world's first full-frame camera to have built-in ND filters and IBIS, some people felt its expensive price tag was not justified for the flaws it had. But now Sony are throwing punches back. They have listened to feedback and returned with the Firmware 2.0 for the Sony Burano. Now this aims to fix most of those complaints we've seen at launch. So let's dive into what is actually new here, starting with the biggest change of all, and that is recording formats. We now have a new Ultra HD mode. It is not DCI 4K, but is essentially the 4K that most people will render and deliver in. This is a full frame crop mode, meaning it comes with a slight crop of 1.1 times. This does fall under the industry standard of what you can class as still a full frame image. So you may be asking, why would Sony add an Ultra HD mode when the Sony Burano could already film in 4K, 6K and even 8.6K? And the answer is readout speed. One of the biggest complaints at launch with the Sony Burano was how slowly it read the images from the sensor. This could sometimes lead to rolling shutter artifacts in the image and also capped any full frame images from the camera to a maximum of 6 depth frames per second. But this new Ultra HD mode comes to solve both of those problems. It now reads off the sensor at around 6 milliseconds. This is over twice as fast as previous options. Now, to be totally honest here, I never personally had one singular issue with rolling shutter prior to this update. That said, it is really great to see this new option in case you are someone who wanted to do something that run the risk of rolling shutter artifacts. And now I also think it makes much more sense in the overall range of Sony's video cameras. 6 milliseconds now becomes the second fastest video camera that Sony currently sell, behind the Sony Venice. And this also places it slightly faster than the Sony FX3 and FX6. And even better, it allows us to now capture in full frame 120 frames per second. But let's hold up a little bit here and let's just be a little bit real, because this is a $25,000 camera. The fact that it even shipped without the ability to capture 120 frames in 4K when the $4,000 Sony FX3 can do that is kind of silly. There's also another new Super 35 mode which captures in HD, and this basically takes everything in the UHD mode and pushes it even further. It offers a readout speed of around 2 to 3 milliseconds. It is really honestly going to give you global shutter looking footage. It also allows you to capture up to 240 frames per second. There is a weird catch here though. This is the only mode in the camera that is limited to only filming in XAVCI. All the other modes allow you to capture in both XAVCI and both XOCN, which is the compressed RAW codec from Sony. And I know that's a lot of numbers and letters and specs, so I did take this new mode out into the real world to test it, and I honestly thought it was going to be quite bad, thinking it's Super 35 and it is 1920 by 1080 resolution. But honestly, it surprised me massively. This footage actually looks really nice. The Burano in this mode really does start to feel like it's becoming the powerhouse that can demand the price it is sold at. I was shooting 240 frames per second in autofocus, in auto ND of some fast action sport, and honestly it was nailing pretty much 95% of the shots. This is a super powerful mode and is going to be amazing for capturing sports and wildlife. You're going to honestly get some incredible footage shooting in this mode at 240 frames per second. Honestly, I don't think there are many cameras on planet Earth that can capture this level of quality at this speed and reliability. Next up we have another new Super 35mm mode. Now this one is in a 4:3 ratio, so you would imagine it is aimed at anamorphic shooters. Now I'm not going to call this open gate because I believe the definition of open gate is you capture the full sensor readout, and this is a crop of the sensor. But that said, being in 4:3 mode does mean that there are some major advantages when shooting anamorphic. I did take this out with some anamorphic glass and test it, and it looks great. My biggest issue is though that all the latest anamorphic lenses that are really great and affordable are all pretty much full frame. And when you put full frame anamorphic lenses on a Super 35mm crop, you lose so much of the character, as with anamorphic glass, the character lives around the edge. So the anamorphic look on those full frame lenses is very much dulled down, which I'm not a massive fan of. If you are using Super 35mm anamorphic lenses, you'll be totally fine. The problem is, you don't buy a Sony Burano to shoot in Super 35mm. And in 2025, at this kind of price point where this camera sits, I just simply think we need a full frame open gate mode for anamorphic shooting. Before we move on from recording modes, there's a couple small fixes and tweaks. You can now get 24p across more modes in the RAW capture, which is great to see. And they've also added some more S&Q options which slot in odd places like 72, 68 and 88 and others along those lines. So overall, to wrap up this recording mode section, I have mixed feelings. I do think it's really impressive that Sony was able to fix the readout speed from the sensor via a firmware update, as most times with cameras this is limited via hardware, so well done to Sony for that. But on the other hand, it seems classic Sony. It has taken us a year and a half to get 120 frames in 4K and there is still no full frame open gate. But that is enough of that. Let's move on to my next favourite part about this update and why it is also equally as frustrating. Next up we have a new additional exposure tool. This is called High/Low Key. This is not brand new tech, this is in the Venice and also has been in some of Sony's older higher end cameras. In theory this is pretty simple. You have 3 different modes. You have a normal mode which the camera will capture, you have a low mode which lifts the shadows, and you have a high mode which brings down the highlights. Now to be clear, you only ever capture the normal mode, so the bringing up the shadows and down the highlights is only ever a viewing monitor thing. The benefit here is you're being able to see into the shadows and into those highlights without turning off your LUT. So simply imagine when you look at a log profile, you get to see all the detail and information that is actually being captured. But when you apply a LUT for monitoring, you no longer see the information of the log profile. So this lifts and lowers the image to try and give you, in your lighting and exposure, an idea of where information is and is not. But for me, there is a major elephant in the room, which is simply, where is false colour? How have we got another update for this camera without seeing false colour? It's already in the Venice, so we know they have mapped it to S-Log3. I do not believe there are any technical limitations inside a Sony Burano with how powerful them internals are that limit us from using false colour. Meaning surely Sony don't seriously believe that false colour is going to be the gatekeeper to getting someone to switch from buying a Sony Burano into a Sony Venice 2. They can't seriously believe that false colour is going to be the decision maker between, yeah, I'm going to spend an extra $30,000 because I want built-in false colour. Honestly, I can already see what is going to happen here. In about 2 years from now, when the Burano is 3 or 4 years old, they will finally announce that false colour is coming to the Burano and make us wait 10 months before the firmware actually drops to get it. It is actually ridiculous. The Burano is part of the Cine Alta line of cameras. It simply can't live inside that price point and line of cameras without having built-in false colour. Where Sony did do good though is it actually brought some improvements to the IBIS system. You can now actually choose between active low and active high when inside the 6K mode on the Burano, which just so happens to be my personal favourite shooting mode. There's also some improvements to the AF system inside the camera when capturing in 30 frames per second or under. What would happen previously is it would read the AF of whatever frame rate you are in. But now if you are in 24 or 25 frames per second, it will still in the background read the AF system at 60 frames per second, meaning you should see improved AF tracking. On paper that sounds pretty smart to me, and I must say that the AF system was rock solid on the Burano before the update, so if it gets even better then I am happy. We also now see the addition of the 709 tone picture profile. This picture profile was introduced in the FX line of cameras from Sony, and what it is designed to do is when you are shooting a multicam setup of Sony cameras, you set them all to the 709 tone picture profile and it will give them all matching Rec 709 looks. From my testing against my FX3, this works pretty well. But in all honesty, I think anyone with a little bit of experience in colour grading would be able to achieve this from S-Log anyway, so it's not essential, but it is a time saver. There was also some weird limitations when using the HDMI and SDI for monitoring. I won't bore you with diving into all the details, but the good news is we are fixed and now monitoring out of the Burano is pretty solid. They've added a couple options to the quick menu like white balance and formatting your media card. They have improved the preset white balances from 3 to I believe 8, and all of these little tweaks in the menu just really stack up to make it much more friendlier camera to use. And these are honestly one of my favourite parts about this 2.0 update. On one hand, I do understand what took Sony so long to roll this update out. Because it's a Cine Alta camera, reliability is absolutely critical. You have to make sure there are no glitches or bugs because they can be extremely costly mistakes on those higher budget sets. That being said, I do think this is around 1 year too late. This update would have been amazing at 6 months after the Burano was launched, but better late than never. We are starting to see the price point come down of the Burano, which is good to see. Do not get me wrong, I still think it is a slightly overpriced camera for where it sits in the market and how good the competition around the Burano seems to be getting. If, say, Sony do bring us a 3.0 update in the future that brings us like a full sensor open gate mode and false colour, and we slowly see the price creep down to say the 20k or below mark, I really think the Burano might come into that kind of Goldilocks zone. But to keep things honest, even with the weird flaws that Sony put on it and the expensive price tag, the Sony Burano is still the best all-rounder camera I have personally ever used. And if you want to see what my favourite lenses are to pair with the Burano, watch this video here.